8 years, 283 episodes, 10 seasons of a children's cartoon about a boy and his magical dog living in the ruins of a post-apocalyptic world, 1 full-hour finale, 4 spin-off specials on a streaming service, 1 sequel series produced years after the original ended, and underneath all of those numbers, another set of numbers that the show's official histories prefer not to count. At least 3 episodes pulled from international rotation, at least 2 countries where the show was banned outright, at least 1 promotional partnership that was killed because a producer pointed at a moment in a song and said the wrong word about it, at least 1 beloved supporting character who had to be recast because the actor who voiced him was arrested, 1 showrunner who walked away from his own creation on the record because the job was breaking him, 1 co-creator who left to make her own show after a single half-hour episode about a man and the little girl he saved during the apocalypse, and 1 final scene in the very last minutes of the very last episode that was edited and removed and quietly cut from broadcasts in country after country because 2 women in a children's cartoon kissed. That is the show. That is what people mean when they say Adventure Time was something special. Not the comedy, not the world building, not the songs, though the songs are part of it. The thing that made Adventure Time matter is the thing that made Adventure Time controversial, and those 2 things are the same thing. Every push the show made towards something true cost it something somewhere. Every step into territory other children's cartoons would not enter triggered a corresponding pullback from a network executive or a foreign broadcaster or a cultural watchdog. The list of things Adventure Time fought for is identical to the list of things people tried to remove from it, and if you lay those removals out in order, side by side with the episodes themselves, what you end up with is not a list of mistakes. It is a map, a negative image, a picture of the show drawn entirely in the shape of what was taken out. This is not a video about scandal. This is a video about what censorship reveals, about how the things a culture cuts from a children's program tell you exactly what that program was doing, more clearly than the program itself can ever tell you. The episodes that were banned, the frames that were edited, the promotional series that was cancelled, the producer who was fired, the kiss that was removed, the actor who was replaced, the creators who walked away. Every one of those moments is evidence. Every one of them is a coordinate, and once you connect them, the picture they form is the show itself, seen from the outside. Welcome to Tome. Get comfortable. This one goes deep. Let us get into it. There is a moment in Season 3 of Adventure Time, in an episode called What Was Missing, where the show does something so quiet that most people watching it for the first time do not notice it has happened. The episode aired on September 26th, 2011. It is the 10th episode of the season. The plot, on the surface, is simple. A creature called the Door Lord steals important objects from Finn, Jake, Princess Bubblegum, and Marceline, and the 4 of them must form a band and play a song that expresses how they truly feel in order to open a magical door and recover what was taken. The song is the centerpiece. Marceline writes it. The lyrics are aimed at someone in the room. And the way the camera moves during the performance, the way the staging works, the way the song's emotional weight is distributed across the 4 characters, makes it clear to anyone watching closely that the person Marceline is singing to is Princess Bubblegum. The song's lyrics paraphrased, describe loving someone who has changed, someone who used to wear a shirt the singer made for them and does not wear it anymore, someone who has become distant. The lyric pleads with this person not to be the way they are now, to come back to who they used to be. Marceline sings these lines while staring directly at Princess Bubblegum. The show does not tell you who the song is about. The show does not need to. Princess Bubblegum, in the same episode, is shown to be wearing the shirt that Marceline made for her, underneath her royal clothing, privately, not for anyone to see. The reveal is dropped in casually, without comment, the way Adventure Time so often dropped its largest emotional disclosures in the corners of episodes that seem to be about something else. The shirt exists, the song exists, the performance exists, and the show, which has 11 minutes of episode time and a child audience and a network standards department and a corporate parent that distributes its content to dozens of countries with dozens of different laws about what can and cannot be shown to minors, says nothing about what those three pieces of evidence mean when you put them together. The show does not have to say anything. The audience already knows. This is the moment that Adventure Time announces itself, not with the pilot, not with the early episodes about adventure and slime and goofy magical artifacts, with this. With a song between two women, sung in code, in an episode that aired on a children's network, in a season produced by a creator who would later step down from the show because the pressure of running it broke him. 11 minutes of cartoon, one song, two characters who have been background figures for most of the series, foregrounded for the first time as something more than friends, and outside the show, in the world watching it, a producer at the studio that was making a promotional companion show called Mathematical, working under the Frederator Studios banner, watched this episode, recapped it for the promotional series, and at one point during his summary of the song, gave a thumbs up to the camera and said the words, "thumbs up," for subtext. That sentence was the end of his career on Adventure Time. The producer was a man named Dan Rickmers. Frederator Studios was the production company run by Fred Seibert that had been making Mathematical, a recurring web series of episode summaries and behind-the-scenes content released alongside Adventure Time. Mathematical existed as a way to extend the show's universe online, to give fans extra material between episodes, to amplify the brand. It had been running since the start of the series. Rickmers was the producer. The format was casual. He would discuss the most recent episode in a friendly, conversational tone. When he covered what was missing, when he reached the moment in the song where Marceline's feelings about Princess Bubblegum become clear to anyone listening, he gave the camera a thumbs up and named the thing the show would not name. Mathematical was cancelled shortly afterward. Rickmers was fired. Fred Seibert went on the record about the firing. He stated explicitly that neither Cartoon Network nor the creative crew of Adventure Time had pressured Frederator into taking action. The decision, according to Seibert, was Frederator's alone. That detail matters. It means that the firing was not, technically, a censorship event imposed from above by a network or by a corporate parent. It was a self-protective gesture by a smaller production company that was afraid of what acknowledging the subtext might cost them. The fear was not of the parent network's response. The fear was of what would happen to the partnership, the licensing, the broader relationship if the company aligned itself publicly with a reading the show itself had refused to confirm. Think about what that actually means. Pendleton Ward and his crew had built into the show, with care, a love story between two women that they could not say out loud because the network would not allow it to be said out loud. They communicated it through staging, through song lyrics, through props, through the placement of a shirt under another character's clothing. They built a fortress of subtext, and the moment a partner producer pointed at the fortress and named the thing inside it, the partner producer was removed. The subtext was load-bearing. The whole architecture of how Adventure Time was telling its queer story rested on the fact that the queerness was implied rather than stated. The implication could be defended in 100 ways. The lyrics could be read as friendship. The shirt could be a gag. The song could be about anyone, as long as the show maintained the option of multiple readings. It could be broadcast in countries where one of those readings would have made it illegal. The moment a producer publicly committed to one reading, the protective ambiguity collapsed, and so the producer was the one who had to go, not the show. This is the architecture of how Adventure Time told its truths during the period when those truths could not be told directly. It was not bravery in the way bravery is often performed. It was bravery in a much harder, much quieter form. It was a creative team building a thing they knew they could not show, while showing it anyway, while preserving exactly enough plausible deniability that the thing could keep being broadcast in markets that would not have tolerated its explicit form. And it was the creative team accepting, as part of the cost of doing this, that anyone who pointed at what was happening would be punished for pointing. Olivia Olson, the actress who voices Marceline, confirmed years later, in a relaxed setting at a fan event at Barnes & Noble in 2014, that Pendleton Ward had told her directly that Princess Bubblegum and Marceline had dated. The relationship was textually real. It existed in the show's Bible. It was simply not allowed to be said out loud, on screen, in a way that would create problems for the show in international markets. Olsen said this casually, conversationally, the way someone shares an open secret. The clip of her saying it traveled. It became part of the show's lore, an unofficial confirmation of what the show had been telling its careful viewers for years. But notice the structure. The producer who said the subtext was real was fired. The actress who said the relationship was real was free to say so. The difference was not the words. The words were essentially the same. The difference was who was speaking and what platform they were speaking on. A producer on a Frederator promotional channel speaking with the implicit authority of the production apparatus was a problem. An actress at a fan event speaking as herself was not. The show could maintain its protective fiction as long as official channels held the line. Off the record was fine. The record. On the record was unacceptable. The fortress of subtext could absorb a rumor. It could not absorb an admission. This is the first piece of the map. A song that meant something the show could not say. A producer who said it. A firing that followed. A creator who maintained the line. An actress who broke it years later in a way that could not be reversed, but could be tolerated. The censorship in this case did not target the show itself. It targeted the moment of clarity around the show. It removed the person who clarified. The show kept going. The the subtext kept being subtext, and the audience that had already understood what was happening understood it more clearly than ever, because the firing of Dan Rickmers was itself a confirmation. He was not fired for being wrong, he was fired for being right out loud. That is what censorship reveals, not the absence of the thing being censored, the presence of it. The thing was there. The thing was visible enough that someone saw it and said its name. The reaction to his saying its name proved that the thing was real. If there had been no subtext, there would have been nothing to acknowledge. There would have been no reason to fire anyone. The firing is the evidence. The cancellation of mathematical is the evidence. The record of those events is the show, drawn in the negative space. There is a version of the history of Adventure Time in which everything Bubbline became was an accident, a misreading by an audience that wanted something the creators had not intended. That version of the history is not consistent with what actually happened. Creators do not have producers fired for naming things that are not there. The firing is proof of authorship. It is proof that the thing was placed in the show with intent, by people who knew exactly what they were placing and who had agreed in advance that the placement would be defended through deniability rather than through declaration. The production company that fired Rickmers was, in effect, doing the work of preserving the queerness of the show by removing the person who had threatened to make it undeniable. Adventure Time's queer love story stayed in the show for 7 more years because that producer was no longer there to talk about it. That is not a small thing. That is the entire shape of how a generation of children's animation handled queer content during the period before networks were willing to allow it openly. Adventure Time was not the only show doing this. Steven Universe, created by Rebecca Sugar after she left Adventure Time, would do something similar with more directness, eventually breaking through to explicit on-screen queerness in a way Adventure Time itself was never quite allowed to do until the very last minutes of the very last episode. But Adventure Time was first. Adventure Time was the prototype. Adventure Time figured out, painfully, in real time, with one of its partner producers as the casualty, exactly how much you could place into a children's cartoon before the protective fiction collapsed, and exactly what it would cost to maintain that fiction once it was placed. What was missing in the episode title, what was missing was the thing the song could not be allowed to name. The episode is, in that sense, perfectly titled. The whole show is built around the thing that is missing from it, the thing that is present everywhere and named nowhere, the thing the audience must complete in their own minds because the show cannot complete it for them. The first map coordinate is here, a song, a producer, a firing, subtext that was load-bearing, a creative team that had committed itself years before the broadcast culture would catch up to telling a story it could not yet say out loud. Hold that in your mind. The story is going to keep happening in different forms, in different countries, in different episodes for the next 7 years. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a scene that does not appear in the show because it is the show viewed from outside. In 2014, Adventure Time was banned in Kenya, not edited, not pulled from a single time slot, banned. Removed from broadcast on the grounds that the show was, in the language of the Kenyan Film Classification Board, pro-gay. The decision named Adventure Time alongside several other animated programs and labeled them collectively as a danger to children. The reasoning was specific. The board pointed to elements within the shows that suggested same-sex affection, queer subtext, or characters whose presentation did not fit traditional gender norms. Adventure Time was singled out by name. This is not interpretation, this is record. The Kenyan Film Classification Board in 2014 identified Adventure Time as a queer text and acted accordingly. The show that the United States network kept telling its viewers was about a boy and his dog having magical adventures in a fairy tale land was, in another country's reading, a vehicle for content that was incompatible with the laws of that country regarding the depiction of same-sex relationships. The American audience saw Finn and Jake. The Kenyan board saw Princess Bubblegum and Marceline. Both readings were correct. The show contained both. The American audience was permitted to enjoy the surface. The Kenyan audience was not permitted to encounter the depths. Sit with that for a moment. A children's cartoon broadcast on Cartoon Network, ostensibly about adventure and friendship, was identified by a foreign government regulatory body as being pro-gay enough to warrant a national broadcast ban. The ban did not apply to a single episode. It did not apply to a specific scene. It applied to the entire series. The reasoning, again paraphrased from public record, was that the show, taken as a whole, normalized queerness for its child audience. The board's job, as it understood that job, was to prevent that normalization, so the show was removed. What is being said by that ban, when you hear it clearly, is that Adventure Time succeeded at the thing the show's American producers had been working so carefully to do, without ever explicitly saying they were doing it. The subtext was readable. The queer content was load-bearing in ways that could not be removed without dismantling the show. A foreign government's broadcast regulator looked at the program and determined that it could not be shown to children in that country because the children might absorb something the regulator did not want them to absorb. That is not a misreading. That is a perfectly accurate reading. The show was doing exactly what the Kenyan board accused it of doing. The American audience was simply, in most cases, not paying close enough attention to notice. This is the second coordinate on the map. The first was a producer fired for naming the subtext. The second is an entire country banning the show on the basis of the same subtext. The two events are connected. They are both evidence that the subtext was there, was real, was readable, and was strong enough that careful viewers could see it from across the world. The show, for all its protective ambiguity, was telegraphing its queerness with enough clarity that a regulator in Nairobi could spot it from a single viewing pass and pull the entire program off the air. There is something almost paradoxical in this. The show's American defenders for years would argue against the queer reading by pointing to the absence of explicit confirmation. The show, they would say, never directly stated that Princess Bubblegum and Marceline were a couple. The shirt could be friendship. the song could be a misunderstanding, the hovering, the longing glances, the protectiveness, the body language, the historical hints about a shared past. All of it could be interpreted as friendship between two old friends who happen to be very emotionally entangled in a non-romantic way. This argument was always available because the show, by network requirement, had left the door open for it. But the door was not really open. It was a painted door. Anyone with eyes could see what was on the other side. The Kenyan board could see it. The fired producer could see it. The audience that grew up watching the show could see it. The actress who voiced one of the characters could see it. Pendleton Ward, who had told the actress about the relationship directly, had built it into the show on purpose. The protective ambiguity was a legal fiction maintained for the sake of broadcast contracts. It was not a creative ambiguity. There was no real question internally about who Marceline and Princess Bubblegum were to each other. There was only a question about how much the show could afford to admit before the broadcast terms would force a change. When the ban came down in Kenya, the protective fiction failed. Not because the show was caught doing something it was not actually doing, because the show was caught doing something it actually was doing. The fortress of subtext, held in markets where the regulators were less attentive or less hostile, it collapsed in markets where the regulators were paying close attention and were operating under laws that took queer subtext seriously enough to prosecute it. Adventure Time lost Kenya, not because Adventure Time had failed to be subtle. Adventure Time lost Kenya because Adventure Time's subtlety was always a courtesy, not a disguise. The show was, in fact, what the show was, and once a country's regulatory apparatus chose to read the show as it was, the show was unbroadcastable. This is what censorship reveals when you watch it carefully. Not weakness, not flaw, not creative failure, the opposite. Censorship reveals the parts of a work that are functioning at the highest level of what they were designed to do. A show that is not actually saying anything cannot be banned for what it is saying. A show that is banned for what it is saying is, by definition, saying something. Adventure Time was banned in Kenya because Adventure Time, when read accurately, was queer. The ban is the proof of the queerness. The ban is the show's deepest confirmation that the work was successful in this specific arena at the thing it had been quietly trying to do for years. The ban also reveals something about the structure of children's animation in the period when Adventure Time was airing. The show's producers had to know when they built the relationship between Princess Bubblegum and Marceline into the series that this relationship would cost them in certain markets. The cost was foreseeable. The Kenyan ban did not come from nowhere. Similar bans, similar regulatory actions, similar broadcast restrictions had happened to other queer adjacent programming for decades. The producers chose to build the relationship into the show anyway. They accepted the cost in advance. They decided that the value of the story they were telling, the value of letting children see something that resembled their own future, the value of building a show that would matter to a generation of viewers who needed to see themselves, was worth more than the broadcast revenue from the markets that would not allow the show to air. That is a creative decision. That is an editorial decision. That is a decision made by people who understood exactly what they were doing and what it would cost. The show is the proof of the decision. The ban is the proof of the cost. The two together are the proof that the decision was real, intentional, considered, and worth it to the people who made it. Adventure Time in 2014 paid a significant price for being the show it was, and the show kept being that show. The producers did not, in response to the Kenyan ban, retroactively soften the relationship between Princess Bubblegum and Marceline. They did not edit episodes. They did not insert disclaimers. They allowed the ban to stand and continued to make the show as they had been making it. That is what conviction looks like in the production of a children's cartoon. It looks like accepting that an entire country's audience will not be able to watch your show because the alternative is making a show that does not contain the thing you wanted to make a show about. The producers chose the show. They paid the price. The map gains a second coordinate. Hold that next to the first one. A producer fired in 2011 for naming the subtext too clearly on a promotional channel. A country lost in 2014 for being unable to broadcast the show that contained the subtext. 3 years apart. Same root cause, different costs. The show is the same show in both cases. The show is doing the same thing. The world's response to what the show is doing varies. Each variation is a piece of evidence. Each variation tells you something the show itself could not tell you, because the show could not address its own censorship without breaking the protective fictions that allowed the show to exist in markets where censorship had not yet happened. The map is forming. 2 coordinates, a producer and a country, a firing and a ban, both of them caused by the same thing in the show, a thing the show could not name out loud, a thing that was nevertheless visible enough to be acted upon. The negative image is taking shape. We are not yet looking at the show. We are looking at the silhouette of the show, drawn entirely in the shape of what was removed in response to it. There is a second pattern that the censorship history of Adventure Time reveals. The first pattern is the queer content and its costs, which we will keep tracing throughout this video. The second pattern is something different. It has to do with the show's willingness to enter territory that other children's cartoons would not enter in domains other than queer representation. The show would, at various points, depict things that television programs aimed at children typically did not depict. Death, threat to children specifically, religious or quasi-religious imagery in ways that could offend or alarm, power dynamics involving female characters that some markets found uncomfortable. The show was, in these areas as in the queer area, willing to push, and in these areas as in the queer area, the show would discover, episode by episode, exactly which markets would respond by pulling the episode from rotation. There is an episode in season 4 called Goliad. It is the 11th episode of that season. It aired on July 2nd, 2012. The plot involves Princess Bubblegum creating a sphinx-like creature, an heir, an organic computer with telepathic abilities, intended to rule the Candy Kingdom in her place after her death. The creature is named Goliad. She is a child, in the sense that she has just been created and has the emotional and intellectual development of a young being learning the world for the first time. She is also, by virtue of how Princess Bubblegum has built her, capable of altering reality through telepathic force. The episode is, on the surface, a story about education, about what it means to teach a powerful being how to use her power for good, about whether kindness can be transmitted from one consciousness to another, or whether each person has to discover it for themselves. Underneath that surface, the episode is about a god, specifically a god created by a princess who turns out to have her creator's capacity for ruthlessness without her creator's centuries of moral calibration. Goliad watches Finn and Jake try to teach a group of candy children to play together. She concludes that humans like Finn rule through inspiration, while Sphinx-like rulers like Princess Bubblegum rule through control. She decides to rule through control. She begins to mentally compel the entire kingdom. She becomes, in effect, a deity. Princess Bubblegum, realizing the experiment has gone wrong, creates a second Sphinx, named Stormo, made from Finn's hair, hoping that the second creature will be inherently more compassionate than the first. Stormo and Goliad battle telepathically and lock each other into an eternal psychic stalemate. They do not die, they do not win, they float, immobilized by each other, frozen in mid-air, locked in a fight that, the show implies, will last for the rest of time. That is the ending. A child god, created by another god, frozen in eternal combat with a second child god, both of them rendered immobile until the heat death of the universe, because the first one chose tyranny. The episode aired on a children's network in the United States without significant comment. It was pulled from rotation in the United Kingdom and Spain after initial airings. It was not removed permanently in the United States, but in those two European markets, the episode disappeared from broadcast schedules and was not replaced. The reasons for the pull were not made public in detail by either market. What is recorded is that the episode aired, played a small number of times, and then was removed from regular rotation. This kind of removal happens periodically with children's programming when content is judged to be inappropriate after the fact. The judgment is rarely accompanied by explicit reasoning. The episode simply stops appearing in broadcast schedules. The reasons are inferred from the content. What is in Goliad that might prompt a pull? A theological premise. A child created by a scientist as a god replacement. A child who decides, when given the choice between love and control, to choose control. A second child created to fight the first, who is, in effect, a counter-god, an eternal stalemate that resolves none of the moral questions raised by the first child's existence, an ending that says, in essence, that God creatures cannot be domesticated, that the only thing that can stop them is another God creature, and that the resulting cosmic balance is permanent and inert. There is no resolution, there is only containment for a children's program. This is unusual, not because children cannot understand it. Children can understand it. The story is, structurally, a fairy tale. It is about a princess and a magical creature and a contest between forces. Children's stories have always told stories like this. What is unusual is the specific shape of the resolution. The episode does not return Goliad to a healthy childhood. It does not redeem her. It does not punish her in a way that closes the story. It freezes her, alive but immobile, locked with her counterpart for the rest of eternity. That ending has no parallel in conventional children's animation. It is closer in tone to a Greek tragedy than to a typical episode of a Cartoon Network program. The show, in choosing this ending, was making a statement about what it was willing to do. It was willing to leave a child character in a state of permanent, unresolvable suffering. It was willing to introduce a god figure and refuse to redeem her. It was willing to depict creation, parental responsibility for one's creations, and the consequences of failed parenting in terms that did not flatter the parent. Princess Bubblegum in the episode is the failed parent. She built Goliad. She did not raise her properly. She tried to fix the problem by creating a second child to fight the first. Her solution is itself a moral failure. The episode does not condemn her. It also does not exonerate her. It simply shows what she did and what came of it. That kind of moral ambiguity in the resolution of a children's story is what some markets cannot accept, not because the markets are wrong to be cautious. The job of a broadcast standards department in any country is to make judgments about what kinds of stories are appropriate for which audiences. Goliad presented a question that some standards departments answered by removing the episode from circulation. The question was, essentially, whether children should be told a story in which a child creature is locked in eternal combat with another child creature because their creator could not figure out how to raise either of them properly. The answer in the United Kingdom and in Spain was that they should not. That answer is also evidence. So, it is evidence about what Adventure Time was doing in this episode. It was doing something that some markets found unacceptable for child audiences. The show, in the United States, did not pull the episode. The show's creative team did not retroactively soften it. The episode stayed in the canon. Goliad and Stormo remained in the show's continuity, frozen in their eternal stalemate. Future episodes would reference them. The events of Goliad would shape Princess Bubblegum's understanding of her own kingdom and her own succession in ways that would matter throughout the rest of the series. The episode was load-bearing. The show could not have removed it without losing pieces of the story that came after. So the show kept Goliad. The show paid the price of having Goliad in some markets and accepted that price. The map gains another coordinate. The first coordinate was a producer fired in the United States for naming queer subtext. The second was a country in Africa that banned the show for broadcasting that subtext. The third is 2 countries in Europe that removed an episode about a god creature, a princess, and the failure of moral education. The pattern is the same in each case. The show makes a choice. The choice is visible. Some markets respond by removing the choice. The choice remains in the show. The show pays the cost. What is interesting about Goliad as a censorship event is that the content being removed is not the same as the queer content. Goliad is not a queer episode. There is no bubline subtext in it. The pull is about something else entirely. The pull is about theology, about the depiction of children in irreversible suffering, about the moral failure of a beloved character. It is about the show's willingness to enter dark territory in domains other than the queer one. And the existence of this pull tells you that the show was, in fact, entering that dark territory, entering that dark. The show was making theological claims. The show was depicting moral failure in characters the audience loved. The show was showing children suffering in ways that some markets considered too far. This is the second pattern in the censorship map. The first pattern is the queer pattern. The second pattern is what we might call the philosophical pattern, the willingness of Adventure Time to be a serious work in the literary critical sense, even though it was packaged as a children's program. The willingness to ask questions about death, about godhood, about parental failure, about the ethics of creation, about the limits of moral reform in terms that did not condescend to the child audience. The pulled episodes in the second pattern are not pulled because they are queer. They are pulled because they are too serious, too literary, too willing to leave the audience without comfort, too unwilling to provide the resolution that conventional children's programming is expected to provide. Both patterns trace the same underlying truth. Adventure Time was a show that did not pretend to be a smaller show than it was. It did not soften itself for the child audience. It did not assume the children watching could not handle complexity. It made the show it wanted to make, and then, episode by episode, market by market, year by year, it discovered which audiences could not be allowed to receive that show as it was. Every removal is a confirmation that the show was doing the work. Every pulled episode is a sign that the show had pushed past the line that some part of the world would defend. There is an episode in season 4 called The Lich. It is the 26th episode of that season. It aired on October 22nd, 2012. It is, in the chronology of the show, a season finale. The Lich is the show's central villain, a being made of pure death, voiced by Ron Perlman. He is not a character in the comedic sense. He is a presence. When he appears, the show changes, the music changes, the lighting changes, the animation slows. He represents, within the show's metaphysics, the principle of universal extinction, the end of life, the will toward nothing. He is, in essence, the show's name for the apocalypse that already happened in the world's prehistory, and the apocalypse that is always threatening to happen again. In The Lich, the season 4 finale, the villain has been freed and is moving across the land. Finn and Jake are pursuing him. The episode involves a multiverse, a magical bag of holding called the Enchiridion, and a sequence of events in which the heroes attempt to seal the Lich permanently in a different reality. The plot is dense, the visuals are heavy, the episode references religious iconography, end times symbolism, and the theme of cosmic balance in ways that go further than most children's animation goes. The Lich himself is portrayed not as a clown villain, but as an entity. He is afforded a kind of religious gravity. His presence is treated with the seriousness of myth. The episode aired in the United States in Cartoon Network Arabic, the regional variant of the network broadcast in much of the Arab world. The episode has not aired for years. The reasons are not officially documented in detail, but the episode is on record as being absent from regular rotation in that broadcast region. The implication, given the content, is that the religious imagery, the depiction of a death deity, and the metaphysical heaviness of the storyline made the episode incompatible with the broadcast standards of the markets the regional channel served. This is a different kind of removal, not a queer removal, not a moral failure removal, a religious removal, a removal driven by the show's willingness to depict, in terms borrowed from sacred imagery, a being who functions as the principle of death. The Lich is not literally a god in any specific real-world religion. He is a fictional villain, but the iconography is heavy. He is depicted with the weight of religious antagonism. He is the show's version of an end times figure, and in markets where end times figures must be handled with theological care, the show's casual deployment of one in a children's animated finale was apparently too much. Hold that against Goliad. In Goliad, the show was pulled in Europe for depicting a god figure created by a princess who failed her morally. In The Lich, the show was pulled in Arabic markets for depicting a death figure who functions like a dark religious entity. 2 episodes, 2 different markets, 2 different specific objections, the same underlying cause. The show's willingness to use religious or quasi-religious material in a children's program in ways that would not have been tolerable to all of the program's audiences. The show, again, did not retroactively edit. The Lich remains a central villain throughout the rest of the series. He returns in later seasons. He is referenced in the finale. The cosmic stakes he represents become foundational to the show's overall arc. The show could not remove him without removing pieces of the show's spine, so the show kept him. The show kept the episode. The show accepted the loss in the regional Arabic broadcast and continued to make the program as it intended to make it. The map gains a 4th coordinate. The Lich, in Arabic markets, removed for the religious heaviness of the season 4 finale. Add it to the producer fired for naming queer subtext, the country that banned the show for being pro-gay, the European markets that pulled Goliad for theological darkness. 4 coordinates, 4 removals, 4 different specific causes, 1 pattern beneath them. The show is making choices that it knows will not be tolerable everywhere, and it is making them anyway, and the world is responding by removing the choices in the markets where they cannot be tolerated, and the show is allowing the removals to stand without rewriting the choices. This is the architecture of authorship under broadcast constraint. The show is being made by people who have decided what the show is going to be. The show is also being broadcast through a system that does not allow universal distribution of work that is made in this way. The mismatch between the show's ambition and the broadcast system's tolerance produces the pattern of removals. The pattern is not random. The pattern is the negative image of the show's editorial commitments. The producer fired, the country banned, the episodes pulled are not embarrassments. They are the show's resume, written in the language of what other people had to do in response to it. There is a small episode in Season 3 of Adventure Time, 22nd of the season, called Jake vs. Meow. It aired on August 22nd, 2011. It is a short, comedic, almost slapstick story about an assassin. Meow is a tiny cat assassin with the voice of a child, hired to kill the Wildberry princess at her wedding. Jake, who has been recruited as a wedding singer, discovers Meow's plot. The episode involves Jake attempting to stop the assassination, the assassin nearly succeeding, and a final standoff in which Jake takes Meow into custody. The tone is light, the premise is heavy. A children's cartoon about a hired killer attempting murder at a wedding. The episode aired in the United States. It was refused airing on Cartoon Network Australia and on the Philippines variant of the network. Both regional broadcasts declined to air the episode based on its assassination themes. The standards departments in those regions concluded that an episode whose comic premise rested on a hired killer attempting to murder a princess was not appropriate for the child audience the network served in those markets. This is a fifth coordinate on the map, and it is a slightly different one than the others. Goliad and the Lich were removed for theological or moral darkness. Jake vs. Meow was refused for comedic darkness. The show was not asking the audience to take the assassination seriously in the way it asked the audience to take the Lich seriously. The assassination was a comedic premise. Meow is a tiny cute cat with a tiny cute voice and a tiny cute weapon. The whole episode is, in tone, a parody of the assassin genre, played for laughs at a children's comedic level. But the broadcast standards departments in Australia and the Philippines did not differentiate between serious depictions of violence and comedic depictions of violence. What they differentiated was whether the underlying content, regardless of tone, was acceptable for child audiences. The underlying content here was a hired killer attempting to murder a character at a wedding. That content, on its own, regardless of the comedic packaging, was deemed not airable. The show's tonal choices did not shield the episode from the standards department's evaluation of its premise. This tells you something about how broadcast censorship operates that is easy to forget. Censorship does not always punish bad content. Sometimes it punishes content that is technically tonally appropriate, but that, when stripped of tone, contains material the standards body cannot defend showing to children. Adventure Time in Jake vs. Meow was not being malicious. It was making a wholesome, slapstick, family-friendly episode about a small, cute assassin. The show's intentions were entirely benign. The episode is one of the lighter episodes in the season. It is funny, it is short, it is harmless in spirit, but the underlying premise, when stripped down, contains the depiction of a contracted murder, and in some markets, that content is not allowed to be depicted in any tone, no matter how harmless the framing, so the episode was pulled. The show kept it in the canon. The episode aired in the United States. It became, for a small subset of fans, a beloved entry in the show's earlier comedic period, and in Australia and the Philippines, the episode never aired, and most viewers in those markets if they have seen it through other means, through international video on demand services, through the eventual streaming era, through fan distributed copies. The episode did not disappear. It simply was not allowed onto the broadcast frequency in those markets. What this coordinate adds to the map is an understanding that Adventure Time's censorship history is not exclusively about its serious choices, it is also about its comedic ones. The show's comedy, in its early seasons especially, ran toward dark premises, played at light tones, cute assassins, magical creatures with murderous intentions, slapstick deaths and resurrections, princesses kidnapped and rescued in ways that were played for jokes, but that would not, if taken at face value, be appropriate for very young viewers. The show, in those early seasons, was figuring out what kind of comedy it wanted to do. It was experimenting with how dark the premises could be while keeping the tone light, and in markets that did not differentiate strongly between premise and tone, some of those experiments were judged to have crossed the line. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a moment in the very last hour of Adventure Time that the show had been moving toward, quietly for the entirety of its run. The series finale, called Come Along With Me, aired on September 3rd, 2018. It is 44 minutes long. It is treated as a single episode, although for runtime purposes, some sources count it as episodes 13 through 16 of season 10. The official title is Come Along With Me. Cartoon Network at the time marketed the episode under the promotional title The Ultimate Adventure, but the show's actual title for the finale, the title used in the show's Bible and by the creative team, is Come Along With Me. The promotional title is a marketing artifact. The official title is the one that matters. Come Along With Me ends a war. The Gum War, as it is called, is a conflict between the Candy Kingdom under Princess Bubblegum and the people of the land of Ooo, allied with Gumbold, an old enemy of Bubblegum's, who has returned to power. The episode is structured as a final confrontation. The war reaches its peak. The cosmic threat that has hung over the show since its earliest seasons returns. The Lich, freed by the chaos, attempts to consume the universe through a magical bag. The heroes mobilize. BMO, the small game console robot, voiced by Nikki Yang, sings a song called Time Adventure. Time Adventure was written by Rebecca Sugar, specifically for the finale. Rebecca Sugar had left Adventure Time years earlier, after storyboarding Simon and Marcy, the Season 5 episode that aired on March 25, 2013. She left to create Steven Universe, which would become its own landmark of queer representation in children's animation. She did not work on Adventure Time after her departure, but for the finale, she came back to write a song. Time Adventure is that song. The lyrics are simple, the arrangement is sparse. The premise is that all of time is happening at once, that what is gone is not gone, that the experiences we have had are permanent fixtures in the structure of reality, that nothing is lost. BMO sings it. The cosmic chaos resolves around the song. The Lich is contained. The war ends. That is the climax of the show on its plot level, but the climax of the show on its emotional level happens in a different scene, slightly earlier in the same episode. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline, after the war, after the cosmic threat is contained, after the dust settles, share a small private moment in a hospital room. Princess Bubblegum is recovering from injuries sustained in the war. Marceline is at her side. They are alone in the room. They speak briefly and then they kiss. This is the scene that the entire show for 10 years had been building toward without being allowed to depict. The kiss is brief. The kiss is small. The kiss is staged with the kind of soft, human intimacy that has nothing to do with spectacle and everything to do with two people who love each other finally being allowed to act on it on screen. The camera does not zoom, the music does not swell, the show does not announce what is happening. It simply allows the moment to happen and then it cuts away. And in markets all over the world, the kiss was removed. This is the most documented censorship event in Adventure Time's broadcast history. The kiss, the moment of explicit confirmation of what the show had been telling its careful viewers for years, was edited out of the broadcast in multiple international markets, where same-sex affection in children's programming was either restricted or outright illegal. The ways in which the cuts happened varied. Some broadcasts simply edited the scene to remove the kiss while preserving the surrounding dialogue. Some broadcasts used different camera angles that omitted the moment of contact. Some broadcasts skipped the scene entirely. The result, across all of the affected markets, was the same. The audience in those markets watched the finale without seeing the moment that the rest of the world saw as the emotional climax of the entire series. This is the third coordinate on the queer side of the censorship map. Add it to the producer fired in 2011 for naming the subtext, the Kenyan ban in 2014 for being pro-gay, and the cuts to the finale kiss in 2018. 3 coordinates spanning 7 years, all of them caused by the same underlying choice on the part of the show. The choice to portray 2 women loving each other across a decade of episodes, to encode that love in subtext when the network would not allow it in text, and to finally, in the very last minutes of the very last episode, place that love in unambiguous form on screen. The kiss is the resolution of the 7-year subtext. The kiss is the show's final answer to the audience that had been reading the love story across all of those episodes. The kiss is the show telling those viewers, after all of the deniability, after all of the protective ambiguity, after all of the careful staging that allowed the love to be present without being said, that they had been reading correctly the whole time. The kiss is the show closing its own door of plausible deniability. The kiss is the moment when the painted door becomes a real door. The kiss is the show admitting finally what it had always been, and the kiss was removed. Sit with that for a moment. The entire architecture of the show's queer storytelling for 10 years had been built on the premise that the love between Princess Bubblegum and Marceline could be sustained as long as it was not stated. The protective fiction held. The producer who broke the fiction was fired. The country that read the fiction accurately was lost. The episodes that pushed too far in adjacent territory were pulled in their respective markets, but the show itself remained broadcastable in those markets because the love was implied rather than depicted. The implication could be defended, the depiction could not. In the finale, the show chose to make the depiction. The show chose to confirm the love. The show chose to allow the kiss to happen in unambiguous form, and the show knew when it made that choice that the markets that had been broadcasting the show on the strength of the implication would no longer be able to broadcast the depiction. The choice was made anyway. The kiss was placed in the script. The kiss was animated. The kiss was rendered. The kiss was shown to the United States audience in unedited form, and the international broadcasters in country after country did the work of removing it from their versions. The map, at this point, looks like this. The producer fired in 2011 for pointing at the subtext. The country banned in 2014 for the entire show being too queer. The European markets that pulled Goliad in 2012 for theological darkness. The Arabic markets that have not aired The Lich for religious heaviness. The Australian and Philippine markets that refused Jake versus Mimo for assassination themes. The international markets that cut the finale kiss in 2018. 6 coordinates, 6 removals, 6 different specific causes, 1 show, 1 sustained editorial vision, 1 creative team that, across 10 years and 10 seasons, made the same kind of choices over and over and accepted the same kind of costs over and over and never softened the show in response. That is the accumulation. That is the weight. That is what the censorship map shows when you connect the coordinates and step back to look at what they form. They do not form a list of mistakes. They do not form a record of the show going too far in a series of ill-considered missteps. They form a portrait of the show, a portrait drawn in subtraction, a portrait whose every line is a place where the world could not tolerate what the show was doing, and whose every curve is a place where the show kept doing it anyway. There is a structure underneath all of this that we have not yet named directly. The structure is that the show was made by people who had decided in advance that the show would be the kind of show that would be censored. The decision was not made episode by episode in response to censorship events. The decision was made at the level of the show's identity before any of the episodes had aired. The show was built to push. The pushing was the point. The censorship was the consequence the creators had accepted before the consequences began. This is unusual in children's animation. Most programming made for children is calibrated in the writer's room to avoid censorship. The standards department's notes shape the writing. The notes shape the storyboarding. The notes shape the final cut. The notes are integrated into the production process to prevent the kinds of removals that we are tracing in Adventure Time's history. Most shows, when faced with the kinds of constraints that Adventure Time faced, soften their content to fit the constraints. They cut the queer subtext. They lighten the theological darkness. They make the assassins less hired and more accidental. They make the gods less divine. They make the princesses less morally compromised. Adventure Time chose not to. Adventure Time, episode by episode, season by season, made the choices that would lead to the removals, made them anyway, paid the costs that came with them, and continued to make the same kinds of choices in the next episode. This is not a show that did not know it was being controversial. This is a show that knew exactly what it was doing and that had decided in advance that doing it was worth more than the markets it would lose. That decision is the architecture beneath the map. The map is the record of the decision. The producer fired, the country banned, the episodes pulled, the kiss removed, are not failures of the show's calibration. They are evidence of the show's calibration. The show was calibrated to push exactly hard enough to draw these specific responses. Any harder and the show would have been pulled entirely from American broadcast. Any softer and the show would have been a different show, a smaller show, a show that did not contain the things that made it Adventure Time. The exact pressure the show applied was the maximum pressure that allowed the show to continue existing. The censorship history is the record of what happened at that maximum pressure point. There is something almost mathematical about this. A show that is calibrated correctly for its broadcast environment will produce no censorship events. A show that is calibrated incorrectly will be pulled entirely. A show that is calibrated to the maximum tolerable level will produce a specific volume and pattern of censorship events that reflect exactly where the boundary of tolerability runs. Adventure Time produced that pattern. The pattern can be read. The reading is the show's portrait. This is the third pattern, beneath the queer pattern and the philosophical pattern, the structural pattern, the recognition that the show's censorship history is not a series of accidents, but a designed feature of the show's relationship to its environment. The creators knew what would be cut. They placed it anyway. They paid the costs. The map is the receipt, and the receipt, when read carefully, tells you exactly how serious the creators were about what they were making and exactly how much they were willing to lose to keep making it the way they wanted to make it. There is a moment in the broader history of Adventure Time that does not appear in any episode. It appears in an interview. It appeared in Rolling Stone on October 2nd, 2014. The piece is titled, in its full form, A Profile of Pendleton Ward and His Show. It is, to date, the most significant interview Pendleton Ward gave during the period of his work as showrunner of Adventure Time. The piece is not formally about controversy. It is, on the surface, a celebration of the show, a portrait of the creator, a kind of mid-run state of the union. Inside the piece, however, is a moment that became its own event in the show's history. Pendleton Ward, speaking to the interviewer, explains why he stepped down as showrunner of his own show during the production of Season 5. The decision to step down had been announced earlier. The reasoning in public had been vague. In the Rolling Stone piece, Ward becomes more specific. He says, paraphrased from his own words, that he quit because the job was driving him nuts. That dealing with people every day in the way that running a show requires wears on you, that the showrunner role had broken him, and that the only way to keep the show alive was to step away from it and let someone else take the job. The someone else was Adam Muto, who had been with the show in various creative capacities since its earliest seasons. Muto took over as showrunner during Season 5 and ran the show through its remaining seasons, through the finale, through Distant Lands, into the planning of the post-Adventure Time animated extensions. Muto's tenure as showrunner is, by the show's own internal accounting, the longer and more sustained of the two. Ward's tenure is the founding one, the shorter one, the one that established the show's voice and identity, but did not survive the rest of the show's run. The Rolling Stone interview is the most candid public discussion of why the change happened. Ward's framing is honest in a way that interviews with showrunners rarely are. He does not blame the network. He does not blame the crew. He does not point at external factors. He points at himself. The job of running the show was breaking him. The interpersonal demands of the role were eroding him. The sustained work of creating, supervising, and approving every aspect of a long-running animated series was, for him, not sustainable. He stepped down to preserve himself and to preserve the show by removing himself from a position he could no longer occupy without harm. This is the internal censorship of Adventure Time. It is not censorship in the conventional sense. It is not a network removing content. It is not a regulator banning a broadcast. It is a creator removing himself from the production of his own work because the production was destroying him. The cost, in this case, is paid not by the audience that loses access to a market, not by the show that loses a piece of its content, but by the creator who loses his role in the work he made. The map gains a new kind of coordinate. Up to this point, every coordinate has been external. A producer fired by a partner studio, a country banning a show, a market pulling an episode, a finale kiss being cut. The new coordinate is internal. It is the showrunner walking away. It is the loss of the creator from the role of leading the show. It is, in its own way, a kind of censorship that the show could not survive in its original form, although the show survived in a different form because of it. Hold this against the previous coordinates. The producer fired in 2011 was external. He worked for a partner studio that responded to a moment in the show by removing him. The country banned in 2014 was external. A government regulator made a decision about whether the show could be broadcast. The episodes pulled across the years were external. Standards departments in various markets made local decisions about what to show out. The kiss cut from the finale was external. Foreign broadcasters edited their versions to comply with their local norms. All of those events happened to the show from outside. Pendleton Ward stepping down was different. It happened to the show from inside. The show lost something, not because the world outside it removed something, but because the show's creator chose to remove himself rather than continue in a role that was breaking him. The show kept going. Adam Muto took over. The remaining seasons were made. The show finished its run. The finale aired. Distant Lands followed. Fiona and Cake followed. The show, by every external measure, survived. But Pendleton Ward, as showrunner, did not. The role that he had created, that the show had been built around in its earliest seasons, that had been animated by his specific creative obsessions and rhythms, no longer existed for him after the transition. The job moved to someone else. The show became, in a slow and unmarked way, a slightly different show, run by a slightly different person, with a slightly different relationship to its own materials. That is its own kind of loss. It is not a lost market. It is not a banned episode. It is not a cut frame. It is the gradual replacement of one creative consciousness with another at the center of the show's production, made necessary by the toll the role was taking on the original creator. The show survived the replacement. The original creator, in the public sense, did not return. He continued to work on the show in lesser capacities. He continued to voice Lumpy Space Princess, the character he had created and performed since the pilot. He continued to be associated with the show in the cultural memory, but the showrunner role, the position from which the show is actually shaped, was no longer his. The Rolling Stone interview is the document of the transition. It is the public record of why the change happened. It is also, when read carefully, a document of what running an animated show on a network like Cartoon Network actually costs. Ward's description of the experience is not flattering to the industry that produced it. The job, in his telling, is one that breaks people. The interpersonal demands, the production demands, the standards demands, the marketing demands, the schedule demands, all of it adds up to a workload that, even for a creator with the talent and energy of Pendleton Ward, became unsustainable. That is also evidence. That is evidence about the conditions under which the show was made. That is evidence about what kind of person the show needed to lead it and what kind of toll that leadership exacted. That is evidence about why so few children's cartoons reach the kind of cultural depth that Adventure Time reached, because the depth requires the kind of obsessive, all-consuming, individual creative leadership that, when actually exercised, breaks the people who exercise it. The internal pattern of the show's controversy history has a different shape than the external pattern. The external pattern is the show pushing against broadcast constraints and paying market costs for the pushing. The internal pattern is the show consuming the people who make it. Both patterns are real. Both patterns are recorded. Both patterns shape what the show is and what it became. There is a parallel internal coordinate that needs to be placed alongside Ward's departure. Rebecca Sugar, who had been a storyboard artist and writer on Adventure Time during its earlier seasons, left the show after storyboarding the season 5 episode Simon and Marcy. The episode is the 14th of season 5. It aired on March 25th, 2013. It is the episode that fills in the backstory of the relationship between Simon Petrikov before he became the Ice King and the child vampire Marceline in the immediate aftermath of the Mushroom War. The episode is, by widespread critical consensus, one of the show's finest single episodes. It is also Rebecca Sugar's last work on the show. Sugar did not leave because the show broke her. She left because she had her own show to make. She had been pitching the project that would become Steven Universe. She had received the green light. She moved to her own production. The departure was not a flight from Adventure Time. It was a graduation toward her own work. And yet, from the perspective of Adventure Time itself, the loss is the same in shape. A creative voice that had been central to the show's emotional texture, particularly in episodes involving the Marceline arc, removed itself from the show's production. The remaining seasons were made without her. Future episodes about Marceline, about Simon, about the relationship between them, would be made by other writers and storyboard artists, often referencing the foundation that Sugar had laid in episodes like Simon and Marcy and I Remember You, but built by different hands. This is another kind of internal loss. It is not a creator who was broken by the role. It is a creator who outgrew the role. The result for the show is similar. A piece of the show's creative consciousness moves elsewhere. The show continues without it. The show continues to use the foundation that creator built. The show does not, however, get more of that creator's specific contributions in future seasons. The episodes Sugar would have storyboarded if she had stayed do not exist. The work she did on Adventure Time is finite. The work she did on Steven Universe, which the world would eventually receive, is what came of her departure. The map gains a sister coordinate to Pendleton Wards. The internal pattern is now visible as more than a single event. It is a pattern in itself. The show, during its run, lost both of its founding creative voices to different but related causes. Ward to burnout, Sugar to ambition. The show survived both losses, was reshaped by both losses, became something different than it would have been without either loss. The internal coordinates, like the external ones, are part of the show's portrait. There is an important nuance here. Sugar's departure was not a controversy in the public sense. It was a healthy creative transition. She moved on to make her own show. That show became important in its own right. The transition is not a wound in the way that the Rolling Stone interview suggests Ward's departure was a wound, but the transition is still a loss for Adventure Time, in the specific sense that the show, after she left, did not get her future contributions. The episodes she would have made do not exist. The show that emerged from her absence is not the show that would have existed if she had stayed. That is also part of the censorship map. In the broadest reading of the term, the map is not only about external removals, it is about all the things the show could have been but was not. The episodes that would have happened if Sugar had stayed, the seasons that would have happened if Ward had not burned out, the markets that would have aired the show if the queer subtext had not been there, the finales that would have been broadcast unedited if the kiss had not been included. Every one of those alternative versions is a coordinate on the map, a point where the actual show diverges from what the show could have been under different conditions. The actual show is the one we have. The alternative show is the negative space, and the negative space, when read carefully, is as informative as the show itself. There is an episode of Adventure Time, Season 5, Episode 14, called Simon and Marcy. It aired on March 25th, 2013. It was Rebecca Sugar's last storyboard. The episode is, on the surface, a flashback. Simon Petrikov, who would later become the Ice King, is shown at a younger age, partially transformed by the crown, but still mostly himself. He is alone with a child vampire named Marceline in a post-apocalyptic Brooklyn. The Mushroom War has happened. The world has ended. Simon is keeping Marceline alive. He is searching for food. He is fighting off mutants. He is failing slowly, and he is trying not to put on the crown that will take his memory of her away. The episode is dense with images that have nothing to do with the typical content of children's animation. A father figure who is not the child's biological father, struggling to keep her alive in a destroyed world. A magical artifact that, when worn for survival, erases the wearer's memory of who the survival is for. A child who watches her caretaker forget her in real time across the span of years, while she remains the only constant in his deteriorating mind. A theme song from a sitcom called Cheers, sung by Simon to a child vampire, to make her feel better in the ruins of a destroyed grocery store. That last image is the episode's central scene. Simon, unable to find food, with Marceline sick from hunger, sings the Cheers theme. The song is about a place where everybody knows your name, where everybody is happy that you came, where the people who care about you are waiting. He sings it in the ruins to a child in a destroyed world, in an episode of a children's cartoon, and the show, which knows what it is doing, holds on the moment and lets it land. That is Rebecca Sugar's last storyboard for Adventure Time. That is the work she made before she left the show. That is the foundation she laid for every subsequent appearance of Marceline in the series. The relationship between Simon and Marcy after this episode is settled. The audience knows what Simon was to her. The audience knows what the crown took. The audience knows that Marceline is the only living being who remembers who Simon was before he became the Ice King. The episode is the gift Rebecca Sugar gave the show on her way out, and the show carries the gift through every subsequent Marceline arc, through Stakes, through the finale, through everything that comes after. The cost of giving that gift is that Sugar leaves. The cost of that gift is the rest of the work she would have done on Adventure Time. The cost of that gift is the parallel arcs she would have built if she had stayed. Those costs are real. They are not visible in any individual episode that exists. They are visible only in the absence of episodes that do not exist. The negative space, again. The portrait drawn in subtraction. Sugar's departure is also, in its own way, the show's gain on a longer timeline. Steven Universe, which she made next, became its own landmark of queer representation in children's animation. It was the show that figured out how to do, explicitly and on screen, what Adventure Time had only been able to do in subtext. The path from Adventure Time to Steven Universe is a direct one. The lessons Sugar learned in the writer's room of Adventure Time, working under broadcast constraints, navigating the protective fictions of queer content in children's programming, were carried forward into a show that operated under slightly looser constraints and was able to push further. Steven Universe could not have existed in the form it took if Adventure Time had not existed first, and Adventure Time could not have shaped Steven Universe in this way if Rebecca Sugar had not been part of Adventure Time's foundation. The internal pattern, in its full shape, is now visible. Two founding creative voices left during the show's run. One left because the role was breaking him. One left to make her own show. Both departures cost Adventure Time pieces of what it could have been. Both departures, in different ways, gave the world other things. Ward continued to be associated with Adventure Time in lesser capacities, but the showrunner role was no longer his. Sugar took the lessons of Adventure Time forward into her own work. Adventure Time continued without either of them in the central creative roles, made by Adam Muto and the remaining crew, finishing the show that the founders had started. That continuation is itself an achievement. Most shows do not survive the loss of their original showrunner. Most shows that lose key creative voices, fall apart, become diluted, lose their identity, become indistinguishable from the surrounding programming. Adventure Time did not. The show, under Adam Muto's leadership, retained its voice, retained its commitments, retained the specific kind of attention to detail and willingness to push that had made the show what it was in its earlier seasons. The show finished strong. The finale, when it came, was the show's strongest single episode in many viewers' estimation. The post-show extensions, Distant Lands and Fiona and Cake, continued the show's commitments in new forms and in slightly different broadcast environments. The continuation is part of the show's authorship. The continuation was not an accident. The continuation was the result of careful succession, of a crew that understood what the show was, and that committed to keeping the show what it was, even as the founding figures moved on. That commitment is the show's signature, written across two different eras of leadership, and it is part of what the censorship map records, because the show's commitments did not change when the leadership changed. The push remained the same. The willingness to absorb the costs of the push remained the same. The internal losses did not soften the external commitments. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a coordinate that does not appear inside the original run of Adventure Time at all. It appears instead in the show's afterlife, in the period between the end of the main series in 2018 and the production of the sequel series, Fiona and Cake, which premiered on Max on August 31st, 2023. Something happened to one of the show's most distinctive supporting characters. The character was not killed off. The character was not retired. The character was, instead, recast. The original voice was removed from the role and a new voice was put in its place. The recasting did not happen because the original voice actor's performance had stopped working. The recasting happened because the original voice actor had been charged in January of 2023 with felony domestic battery, and the show had to make a decision about whether to continue associating itself with him. The character is Lemongrab. The original voice actor was Justin Roiland. Lemongrab is, within the show's universe, one of the most singular creations Adventure Time produced. He is a creature created by Princess Bubblegum, like Goliad, although created earlier and with even more visible flaws. He is shaped like an elongated lemon. He has a high, screeching voice. He is emotionally unstable in a comedic way that the show, over time, gradually revealed to be tragic. He was made by a creator who did not know how to raise him. He was sent to govern a remote castle alone. He developed in his isolation into a being whose entire emotional vocabulary consisted of frantic outrage, possessive love, and screaming. He is funny. He is also, in the show's later treatment of him, profoundly sad. The show, across multiple episodes, used Lemongrab as a vehicle for thinking about parental neglect, about the duties creators have toward their creations, about what happens when you make something and then do not give it what it needs to develop. The performance of Lemongrab across the show's run was integral to the character. Justin Roiland's voice work shaped the character into what he became: the screaming, the strange cadences, the sudden tenderness, followed by sudden rage, the comedic and tragic registers existing simultaneously in the same line were elements of the character that emerged from Roiland's specific performance. The character without that performance is a different character. The character with that performance is the one Adventure Time fans came to know. In January of 2023, Roiland was charged with felony domestic battery and false imprisonment in connection with allegations involving a former girlfriend. The charges were public. The story moved quickly through entertainment news. Roiland's other major project, the animated series Rick and Morty, which he co-created and on which he voiced both title characters, parted ways with him within days of the charges becoming public. He was removed from that show. The show began the process of recasting his voice roles for future episodes. In March of 2023, the charges in the original case were dismissed by the District Attorney's Office, but the impact on Roiland's career did not reverse. The studios that had associated with him moved forward with their decisions to separate from him. Adventure Time, in its post-show extensions, faced a specific version of this problem. Lemongrab had appeared in earlier specials in the Distant Lands run. He was expected to appear again in the new sequel series, Fiona and Cake, which was already in production. The question was whether Roiland would return to the role. The studio's answer was no. For Fiona and Cake, the role of Lemongrab was recast. The new voice actor for the character was the drag performer Jinx Monsoon. Monsoon took over the role for the new series and continued to perform Lemongrab in the post-Roiland era of the franchise. This is a different kind of coordinate on the censorship map than the others we have placed. The episodes pulled in international markets were censorship by external regulators. The producer fired in 2011 was a kind of professional censorship by a partner studio. The kiss cut from the finale was censorship by foreign broadcasters. The Roiland recasting is not censorship in any of those senses. It is not the removal of content from the show. It is the removal of a person from the show in response to that person's conduct in his own life, in a context that had nothing directly to do with the show itself. But the recasting is still a coordinate. It is still part of the map. It is still a moment when something that had been part of Adventure Time was removed from Adventure Time, with consequences for what the show could be in the future. The choice to recast was a choice with weight. The show could have chosen to retire the character. The show could have chosen to leave Lemongrab unappear in the new series, simply absent the way characters in long-running shows often quietly fall out of rotation when the actors who voice them become unavailable for various reasons. The show could have written the character out, given him a final episode, ended his story. The show did not. The show chose to keep the character, recast the voice, and continue to use the character in new stories. That choice is itself an editorial decision. It is the decision that the character is more important than the actor who originally voiced him. It is the decision that Lemongrab, as a creation, can survive without Roiland's specific performance behind him. It is the decision that the role can be reinterpreted by a new performer without losing what made the character valuable. Whether that decision was correct, whether Monsoon's interpretation of Lemongrab successfully carries forward what was in the character before, is a question for the audience to evaluate. But the decision itself is part of the show's authorship. The show, in its post-original era, chose what to keep and what to release. It kept the character. It released the actor. It paid the cost of the transition. The character continues. This is the 7th coordinate on the map. Add it to the producer fired in 2011, the country banned in 2014, the European pulls of Goliad in 2012, the Arabic pull of The Lich, the Australian and Philippine refusal of Jake versus Me Mao, and the international cuts of the finale Kiss. 7 coordinates, 7 different specific causes, each of them recording a moment when the show, or the show's environment, or the show's personnel had to make a decision about what could continue and what had to be removed. Each of those decisions, when documented and read together, becomes part of the portrait the show draws of itself in subtraction. The Roiland coordinate has a different temporal shape than the others. It happened after the original show ended. It belongs to the era of the show's afterlife, the period when the franchise was being extended into new formats and new contexts. The censorship pattern in this era includes not just the external broadcast pressures of the original run, but also the internal personnel decisions that the franchise was forced to make as a consequence of events outside the show. The map, after 2023, has to include this category. The franchise, as a continuing entity, is shaped by what it does with its inherited cast. As the world around the franchise changes, there is a question that arises from this coordinate that does not arise from the others. The question is whether the recasting of Lemongrab is a moral censorship or a market censorship. The earlier coordinates were clearly market censorship. A foreign government would not allow the show to broadcast certain content. A regional standards department would not air a particular episode. A partner studio would not employ a producer who pointed at the wrong thing. Those events were market events. They happened because the show, or the people associated with it, did things that the market could not accept. The Roiland recasting is harder to categorize. It happened because Roiland, as a person, was charged with a crime. The crime was unrelated to the show. The crime was unrelated to his work as a voice actor. The recasting was a moral decision by the studio, a judgment that the studio did not want to continue associating its brand with the person under those legal circumstances. That judgment is its own kind of censorship, distinct from the market-driven censorship of the earlier coordinates. Both kinds of censorship are part of how children's animation operates in the era during which Adventure Time was made and continued. The market censorship is the older kind, the kind that has shaped broadcast television for decades, the kind that produces the ban patterns and the pulled episodes and the cut frames. The moral censorship is newer in its current form, although versions of it have existed for a long time, and it operates on a different logic. It is not about what the audience can be shown, it is about who the studio can afford to be associated with. The two kinds are not the same. The two kinds, however, can both reshape a show in real time. The Lemongrab recasting is the case where the moral censorship reshaped Adventure Time after the original run had ended, and where the franchise had to decide how to absorb the change. The franchise's answer, again, was to keep the character and replace the actor. The new performance is different. The character continues. The map records both the original performance and the new one. The map records the decision to make the change. The map records what was lost in the change and what was preserved through it. All of those are coordinates. All of them are part of the picture. The picture, by this point in our reading, is densely populated. It has external coordinates and internal coordinates. It has market coordinates and moral coordinates. It has events from the original run and events from the afterlife. It has the queer pattern, the philosophical pattern, the structural pattern, the personnel pattern. It is the show drawn in subtraction across years and across categories. There is a category we have not yet addressed in detail, although we have touched on it. That category is the show's complicated relationship with Cartoon Network as a corporate parent, with Warner Brothers Discovery as the inheriting media conglomerate after the merger, and with the changing landscape of streaming and broadcast that has reshaped how American animation is produced and distributed during the years since Adventure Time first aired. The corporate context of the show is itself a kind of pressure on the show's editorial choices. The show was made for Cartoon Network. Cartoon Network was acquired into the larger Time Warner ecosystem, then into AT&T's Warner Media, then sold off into Warner Brothers Discovery. Each of those corporate transitions changed the conditions under which the show and its extensions could be made. This is not censorship in the traditional sense. It is corporate context. It is the underlying business environment that shapes what kinds of decisions the studio is willing to make about what to put on the air, what to develop into spin-offs, what to keep streaming, what to remove from circulation as part of cost-cutting measures. In the era of streaming consolidation that followed the Warner Media and Discovery merger, certain animated programs across the broader Cartoon Network catalogue were quietly pulled from the company's streaming services as part of corporate decisions about what to maintain and what to release. Adventure Time itself, in the original main series, has remained generally available, but the surrounding environment has shifted. Other animated series have been pulled. Some shows have been removed from streaming entirely. Some have been cancelled in development. The conditions under which Adventure Time's afterlife is being made have not been stable. The show's creative team has, in interviews and public discussions during the post-original era, addressed the changing environment in various ways. The general framing from the people closest to the show has been one of measured concern. The writers and animators who built Adventure Time have continued to work in the industry, on this franchise, and on others, and they have observed the changes in the corporate landscape with the kind of clear-eyed pragmatism that comes from having spent careers inside the system. The work continues. The conditions are different. The franchise extends. The extensions, when they happen under increasingly compressed timelines, with less generous budgets, with more demands from streaming algorithms about runtime and engagement metrics. The Adventure Time of the late 1910s, made for traditional cable broadcast, is not the same Adventure Time as the Distant Lands era of streaming originals, which is not the same as the Fiona and cake era of post-merger Max programming. Each era is shaped by the corporate context of its making. These shifts are not censorship in the regulator's sense. They are not bans, they are not pulls, but they are constraints. They are the slow tightening of conditions under which the franchise has to operate. They affect what gets made, who gets hired, how long the writer's room can take with the story, what kinds of risks the studio is willing to greenlight, what kinds of content survive the development process. The franchise's continued existence depends on adaptation to those constraints. The adaptations, when they happen, are part of the show's authorship, in the same way that the responses to international broadcast bans were part of the show's authorship during the original run. Each adaptation is a coordinate. Each coordinate adds to the map. What you can read from the map, when you stand back and look at it as a whole, is that Adventure Time is not a single static work. It is a process. It is a sustained creative effort that has, across more than a decade of activity, made a long series of decisions about what to push, what to keep, what to release, what to recast, what to broadcast, what to allow others to remove. The decisions in aggregate are the show. The static episodes are records of the decisions, not the decisions themselves. The map of removals is the most efficient summary of the decision pattern. The map shows you what the show was willing to lose to remain itself. There is a thesis that the entire architecture of this video has been building toward. We have not yet stated it directly. We have shown evidence. We have placed coordinates. We have read patterns. The thesis, finally, in its full form, is this: the censorship history of Adventure Time is not a history of the show being damaged. It is a history of the show being, in the most precise sense, what it was. The removals are not failures of the show. The removals are confirmations of the show's success at the specific tasks it set itself. The episodes pulled, the kiss cut, the country banned, the producer fired, the actor recast, the showrunner stepped down are not blemishes on a record. They are the record. They are the evidence that the show did the thing it was trying to do with sufficient force that the world had to respond to the doing. Most children's animation does not produce this volume or pattern of response. Most children's animation is calibrated to avoid producing it. The fact that Adventure Time produced it, and produced it across categories as different as queer love stories and theological darkness and assassination comedy and creator burnout, tells you that Adventure Time was operating in a different mode than most children's animation. That mode is the mode of serious authorship under broadcast constraint. It is the mode of a creative team that has decided in advance what it wants to make, that knows what the cost of making that thing will be, and that accepts the cost, because the alternative would be making a smaller, lesser, less true version of the thing. The cost was paid in installments. Each installment is a coordinate on the map. The total cost is the sum of all the coordinates. The total benefit against which the cost is measured is the show that exists, the show that was made, the show that the audience watched, the show that the audience remembers, the show that became a generational landmark of animated storytelling in the period it occupied. That is the trade, that is the architecture, that is the meaning of the censorship map. It is not a chronicle of injuries, it is a chronicle of choices. The choices were made by people, The people accepted the costs. The costs are documented in the record of removals, in the broadcasts that happened differently in different countries, in the partnerships that ended, in the credits that changed hands, in the kiss that was cut, in the producer who was fired, in the showrunner who stepped down, in the co-creator who left, in the actor who was replaced. All of it is part of the same story. All of it tells you what kind of show Adventure Time was and what kind of show Adventure Time wanted to be. Sit with that for a moment. Let it land. The show you watched, the show that mattered to you, the show that made you cry at the finale, the show that gave you Marceline and Bubblegum and Finn and Jake and Simon and Marcy and BMO and the Lich and Lemongrab and Princess Bubblegum's complicated, long, historical interior life, is a show that exists in the form it exists in because the people who made it accepted, episode by episode, year by year, that they were making something that not everyone would be allowed to receive. They made it anyway. The map of removals is the proof. There is a smaller observation that follows from this larger thesis. The observation is that the audiences in markets where the show was censored received, in those markets, a different show than the audiences in markets where the show was uncensored. The Kenyan audience, after the ban, did not receive the show at all. The Australian audience never saw Jake versus Mimo on broadcast. The Arabic Cartoon Network audience never saw The Lich. The Spanish and British audiences saw their broadcasts of Goliad pulled. The international audiences, after the finale, saw a finale without the kiss. Each of those audiences received an Adventure Time that was missing pieces. The pieces they were missing were different in each market. The audience that received the most complete version of the show was the American audience, the audience for whom the show was originally produced, the audience for whom the show was calibrated. This is also a coordinate, in a sense. It is a meta-coordinate. It is the coordinate of differential reception. The show, as a single object, was received as multiple different objects, depending on where it was broadcast. Each differential reception is its own version of the show, with its own absences, its own gaps, its own implicit reframing of what the show was. The Kenyan version of Adventure Time is the absence of Adventure Time. The Arabic version is the show without its season 4 finale. The Australian version is the show without one specific season 3 episode. The international finale version is Come Along With Me without the moment of explicit confirmation. Each version is a different show. Each version teaches its audience a different thing about what the show was. This raises a question about authorship that the censorship map cannot fully answer. The question is whether the show, as authored by Pendleton Ward and Adam Muto and Rebecca Sugar and the rest of the creative team, exists in a single canonical form, or whether the show exists instead as a constellation of differential versions, each of which is the show in its specific market. The American canonical version is one version. The international cut versions are other versions. The streaming versions in different territories with different licensing arrangements are still other versions. Adventure Time, as a unified text, may not exist anywhere. It may exist only as a center point that no audience actually receives, with each audience receiving an asymmetric subset of the whole. If that is true, then the censorship map is not a record of removals from a stable central object. It is a record of how the central object was distributed. The map shows you the space of what the show could be in different contexts. The American version is the most complete distribution. The international versions are partial distributions, each one missing different pieces. The map records the missing pieces. The map allows you to reconstruct from the absences what each market's version of the show looked like compared to the American version. That reconstruction is its own kind of analysis. It tells you what each market thought a children's program could and could not contain. It tells you what each market's standards bodies considered transmissible to children. It tells you, by implication, what each market wanted children to grow up not knowing, and what each market was willing to allow children to see. The American version of the show, the most complete one, is also the version that wanted children to know the most. The international versions, with their cuts and pulls and bans, are versions that wanted children to know less. The differential reception is a form of differential education. The censorship map is the curriculum. This framing changes how the show should be read. Adventure Time is not just an animated television program. It is a multinational, multi-market educational instrument distributed in different forms to different child audiences, with each market's version reflecting that market's view of what children should be allowed to understand about love, death, parenthood, divinity, comedy, violence, queerness, and the moral failures of beloved authority figures. The show, in all its versions, was all of those subjects. All of the variations across markets reflect the variations across markets in what the audience could be permitted to receive on those subjects. The American audience received the most. The Kenyan audience received nothing. The audiences in between received partial versions, calibrated to the local boundary of permissibility. That is what the censorship map tells you when you read it at this scale. It tells you that the show was a global cultural object whose distribution was modulated by local political and regulatory conditions. It tells you that the show's authors, in making the show as they made it, were implicitly making decisions about which markets they would lose and which they would keep. It tells you that those decisions were considered and accepted before the broadcasts happened. It tells you that the show paid the price of being itself in real time, across years and territories. It tells you that the price was paid not with money, but with reach. The show traded reach for fidelity. The show chose to be true to itself in some markets, even at the cost of being unavailable in others. That is a remarkable choice for any work to make. It is especially remarkable for a children's program operating under the commercial pressures of broadcast television, where reach and revenue are usually the primary measures of a show's success. Adventure Time was successful by both measures in the markets that allowed it to broadcast. It also accepted deliberately the loss of reach in markets that would have required it to soften. The trade, when measured against the show's eventual cultural footprint, can be evaluated. The show is remembered, the show is studied, the show is referenced, the show is claimed by its audiences as foundational. The trade was worth what it cost. The censorship map is the receipt for the trade. There is a smaller point before we move toward the closing of this analysis that needs to be placed in the record. The point is that the show was never alone in this. Adventure Time was part of a generation of children's animation that pushed against constraints in similar ways and paid similar costs. Steven Universe, made by Rebecca Sugar, after she left Adventure Time, would push further on the queer representation front and would pay its own costs in international markets. Gravity Falls, made by Alex Hirsch, in a different but adjacent corner of the children's animation space, would push on horror and religious content and would pay its own costs. Regular Show, made by J.G. Quintel, would push on workplace and adult content in ways that produced its own kinds of broadcast complications. The shared milieu of animators working in this period, often friends with each other, often crossing over between projects, often watching each other's shows and learning from them, produced a wave of animation that collectively expanded what children's programming could contain. Adventure Time was in some ways the first of that wave. It was the show that established that you could do this. The producers who made the later shows had Adventure Time as a precedent. The networks that had to evaluate the later shows had Adventure Time as evidence that audiences would accept this kind of work. The censorship history of Adventure Time, as we have read it across this video, is also the precedent that allowed the next wave of shows to know what they were getting into when they made their own pushes. The map, in its broader reading, is not just Adventure Time's map. It is the map for an entire creative movement in children's animation that operated during this specific period in this specific way, and that produced its own constellation of beloved, controversial, internationally complicated programs. That movement has, as of the current era, become more difficult to sustain. The conditions under which the shows of that period were made have changed. The networks that supported them have been reorganized. The streaming services that emerged afterward have different priorities. The creator-driven model that produced Adventure Time and its peers has given way, in many cases, to more algorithmically managed development environments, where the kinds of risks that Adventure Time took are harder to greenlight. The next generation of animators who would do what Adventure Time did is operating in a different environment, with different tools, under different pressures. What they make, if they manage to make it, will be its own thing. It will not be exactly Adventure Time. The conditions that produced Adventure Time are not coming back. That is also part of the censorship map. In the broadest reading, the conditions of production are themselves part of what gets censored, in the slow, structural, systemic sense, by the changes in the industry. The show that Adventure Time was could only have existed when it existed, in the conditions in which it existed, made by the people who made it, paid for by the institutions that paid for it. Those conditions have shifted. The show, as a historical object, remains. The show, as a continuing process, has had to adapt to the new conditions, with the consequences we have traced. The original Adventure Time is preserved. The Adventure Time franchise continues in a different context, with different resources. The map of the original is complete. The map of the continuation is still being drawn. There is one more category of removal that we have not directly addressed, and that the censorship map of a show like Adventure Time cannot avoid touching. That category is the absence throughout the original run of certain stories that the show might have told if it had been allowed to. Specifically, the queer relationship between Princess Bubblegum and Marceline, which was implicit throughout the show's run, was finally textualized in the very last minutes of the very last episode. It was not, before that moment, allowed to be a recurring on-screen relationship in the way that other character relationships in the show were. The audience did not get scenes of Bubblegum and Marceline as a couple going through the kinds of relationship arcs that on-screen couples in other shows go through. The audience got subtext, the audience got hints, the audience got the careful staging that allowed the relationship to exist without being said, but the audience did not get the relationship as a textual arc. That is a kind of internal censorship that the show absorbed at the level of what stories it could tell. The producers wanted, by all accounts, to tell more of this story. The network would not allow it during the show's main run. The relationship was, instead, deferred. It was held in reserve. It was placed in subtext for years, and finally, at the very end, allowed to be confirmed in one moment, in one kiss, that the rest of the world then partially removed in international cut versions. The cumulative effect is that Princess Bubblegum and Marceline, as a couple, exist in the show's text for a few seconds at the very end. The rest of the time, they exist in implication. The show, if it had been made under different conditions, might have shown more of them. The show, in the conditions it was made under, could not. This is the largest gap on the map. It is the gap between what the show told and what the show could have told. It is invisible in any single episode, because no episode contains the absent material by definition. It is visible only in the cumulative shape of the show, in the way that the relationship is referenced but not depicted, in the way that the characters orbit each other for 10 years without ever being given the opportunity to be in scenes with each other as the kind of couple they apparently were, in the way that the finale kiss feels to viewers who have been paying attention like the resolution of an unresolved story arc that should have had more episodes than it actually got. The unresolved arc is the absence. The absence is part of the show. The absence is part of what the censorship map records. The closing of this analysis is approaching. We have placed many coordinates. We have read many patterns. We have stated the central thesis. The censorship map of Adventure Time is the show's portrait, drawn in subtraction across years and across categories, as the negative image of the choices the show made and the costs the show accepted to make them. The map is dense, the map is varied. The map records external pressures and internal losses, market constraints and personnel changes, the original run and the afterlife, queer content and theological content, comedic premise and structural authorship. The map is Adventure Time's most accurate self-portrait, more accurate than any single episode could be, because it shows the show in the act of being itself against the resistance of a world that did not want all of it everywhere. There is a final scene that the show ends on that we can use to close this analysis. The scene is from Come Along With Me. The cosmic threat has been resolved. The Lich has been contained. The war has ended. The characters are surveying what remains. The show, knowing it is ending, slows down. There is a long final montage. The years pass. The land of Ooh continues. New characters appear in the gaps where old characters used to be. The bonds the show built across 10 seasons remain in different forms, with different people in different combinations. Time Adventure plays. The song's argument is that nothing is lost, that what has been is permanent, that the experiences accumulated through the show's run are not erased by the show's ending. The argument is consoling. The argument is also, in light of the censorship map we have traced, complicated. Some things were lost. Some things were never allowed to be present in the first place. Some things existed only in markets. The audience watching the finale will never visit. The Time Adventure song, in this context, becomes an argument the show is making about what the audience should keep and what the audience should release. What the audience should keep, the song argues, is the show as the audience received it, in whatever form their market provided. What the audience should release, the song argues, is the disappointment that the show could not be more in their market, in their broadcast, in their cut. The show is offering itself at the close as a complete object that does not need its missing pieces to be valid. The audience is being told that what they have is enough, that the show, in whatever form it reached them, is the show, that nothing is lost. This is generous. It is also, to a viewer who has read the censorship map carefully, a small lie. Things are lost. The Kenyan audience lost the show entirely. The Arabic audience lost the Lich. The Australian audience lost Jake versus Me Mao. The international audiences lost the kiss. Pieces are missing. The Time Adventure song is offering a kind of comfort that the censorship map shows is partially false. Things are lost. The show is offering, in the song, a truce with the loss, an invitation to accept what remains, a frame in which what remains is sufficient. That frame is generous, but it is also, in its own way, a final piece of the show's accommodation with the conditions under which it was made. The show could not promise its audience that nothing was lost, in literal terms, so the show wrote a song that argued, on a different level, that nothing is lost, in the sense that what was experienced is permanent. The argument operates on the existential level rather than the broadcast level. It works there. It does not work as broadcast accounting. The Time Adventure song is the show's last protective fiction. The show is closing its run with one more layer of subtext. The text says nothing is lost. The subtext is that some things are lost, but the show is going to sing its closing song as if they are not, because that is what the show has always done with its losses. The show has always made the work, paid the costs, kept going, and let the work speak for itself in whatever form survived. The song is the show's signature on the body of work. The signature does not list the costs. The signature simply names what the work is. The work is Time Adventure. The work is the bonds. The work is what the audience experienced. That is the show's chosen accounting. The other accounting, the censorship map, runs underneath in parallel, available to anyone who chooses to read it. Both accountings are true. The Time Adventure accounting is the show as the show wants to be remembered. The censorship map is the show as the world received it. The two together are the full picture. The picture is generous. The picture is also honest. The picture taken in full is what Adventure Time was, is, and will continue to be in cultural memory. A children's cartoon that, across 10 years and 10 seasons, refused to be a smaller show than it wanted to be, and accepted the costs of that refusal, and produced a body of work that the people who watched it carry with them in whatever form their market allowed them to receive it. The show, finally, is the show. The show is the episodes, the songs, the characters, the decade of work, the artists who made it, the audience that watched it, the markets that broadcast it, the markets that did not, the producer who was fired, the country that was lost, the episodes that were pulled, the kiss that was cut, the showrunner who stepped down, the co-creator who left, the actor who was replaced, the franchise that continued, the conditions that shifted, all of it, every coordinate, every absence, every presence, every choice made, and every cost accepted. That is the show. That is what Adventure Time was. Sit with that for a moment. Let the inventory complete itself in your mind. The producer fired in 2011 for naming the subtext of a song. The episode pulled in the United Kingdom and Spain in 2012 for depicting child gods in eternal stalemate. The episode banned in Cartoon Network Arabic for the religious heaviness of a season finale featuring an entity made of pure death. The episode refused in Australia and the Philippines for the comedic treatment of a hired killer at a wedding. The country that banned the entire show in 2014 for being pro-gay. The Rolling Stone interview in the same year in which the showrunner explained on record that the job had broken him. The departure of the co-creator after one final episode about a man and the little girl he saved during the apocalypse. The decade of careful, deniable, structurally protected queer subtext between two women in a children's cartoon. The kiss in the finale in 2018 that resolved that subtext and was cut from international broadcasts for resolving it. The legal events in 2023 that led to the recasting of one of the show's most distinctive supporting characters. The corporate transitions across the years that shifted the conditions under which the franchise could continue to be made. All of it, the whole inventory, every line on the map, that is the show. The thesis of this video has been the same from the first cold open. The censorship history of Adventure Time is not a record of damage, it is a record of intention. The show was made by people who knew what they were making and what it would cost. They made it anyway. They paid the costs. They left the record. The record is the map. The map is the show. The show is the map. The two are inseparable because the show's identity is the cumulative pattern of choices about what to push and what to accept, losing. The map is the choice pattern. The show is what those choices produced. If you have been listening to this analysis as you fall asleep, or as you work, or as background while you do something else, you have been receiving an account of one of the most carefully made children's programs in the history of American animation. The careful making was visible in the show, episode by episode, while it was airing. The careful making is visible in retrospect, in the censorship map, in the pattern of removals and confirmations and adaptations that the show produced over its run and into its afterlife. Both kinds of visibility are real. Both kinds tell you what the show was. The map tells you more specifically what the show was willing to lose to be itself. Adventure Time was willing to lose entire markets. Adventure Time was willing to lose a partner promotional series. Adventure Time was willing to lose the broadcast of a finale kiss in dozens of countries. Adventure Time was willing to lose its showrunner to burnout. Adventure Time was willing to lose its co-creator to a different show. Adventure Time was willing to lose, in its afterlife, a beloved actor's performance to circumstances outside the show. Adventure Time was willing, across its run and continuing into its current era, to accept the costs of being itself. The show is the record of those acceptances. The map is the receipt. That is the whole story. A children's cartoon, a boy and his dog, a vampire and a princess, a king who used to be a man, a grocery store in a destroyed Brooklyn, a song about a place where everybody knows your name, a song called Time Adventure, written years after the writer had left, brought back for the finale, a kiss in a hospital room, a war that ends, a montage of years passing, a show that refused, episode by episode, year by year, to be smaller than it wanted to be, a map of removals that, when connected, draws the show's true face, an audience in many countries that received pieces of the show, pieces of an audience in a few that received none of it, an audience in the home market that received it in its most complete form and that has carried the show with them ever since. That is the show. That is the map. That is the meaning of all of it. There is nothing more to add. The inventory is closed. There is one last thing, a small image that might sit with you better than any of the analysis. It is the image of a writer's room in Burbank, California, in roughly 2010 or 2011, where a small group of people, most of them young, most of them new to running a network animated program, are sitting in a circle deciding whether to put something into a song that they know will eventually cost their show a country. The writer of the song is sitting with the lyrics. The producer is sitting with the broadcast notes. The artist who will draw the staging is sitting with the storyboard. The showrunner, before he is broken by the job, is in the corner. They look at each other. They know the cost. They understand exactly what they are about to do. They put the song in anyway. They put the lyric in. They put the staging in. They put the shirt under the princess's clothing. They commit in that small unrecorded room to a multi-year arc of careful, protective, deniable storytelling that will end 7 years later in a hospital room, in a kiss, in dozens of edited international broadcasts, in a Kenyan ban, in a fired producer, in a Rolling Stone interview, in everything we have traced. The decision is made there. The decision is made by people. The people choose this on purpose. That is the moment that does not appear on screen. That is the moment that the censorship map is, in its deepest sense, recording, not the removals. The original choice that made the removals necessary, the willingness in a small room with the broadcast notes on the table, to make the show anyway, to accept the costs in advance, to trust that the audience that will eventually exist, the audience that has not yet been born, will receive what the show is offering and will recognize it for what it is. That trust was justified. The audience exists. The audience received the show. The audience, in many cases, has carried it for a decade and will carry it for many more. The map is the proof of the trust and the proof of the receipt. The trust was placed in a writer's room. The receipt is held by everyone who watched. The show is the bridge between them. That is what Adventure Time finally is. A children's cartoon that placed a long bet on its audience and won the bet by accepting, in installments, the costs of being the show that the audience deserved to receive. Hold that in your mind as the analysis closes. A small room in a quiet building in a city that does not appear on screen at any point in the show. A song written and rewritten across multiple drafts until the lyrics were exactly the right shape to mean what they had to mean, without ever being able to say what they meant. A decision made out loud and on the record by people who knew exactly what was at stake. A decade of episodes, of seasons, of slow, careful pushing, of accepted losses, of preserved fidelity to the original commitment. A map of removals drawn across that decade by the world's responses to the decision, spread across continents, recorded in the broadcast histories of dozens of channels in dozens of countries. A finale in a hospital room that resolved the decision in plain sight in front of the entire audience that had ever watched the show in its complete form. A song called Time Adventure, written by someone who had left and come back specifically to write it. A bet, a receipt, a show. That is the show. That is the map. That is the meaning of all of it. There is nothing more to add. 2. The inventory is closed. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.